Cassandra Blake strode through Houston's Intercontinental Airport like she owned every polished tile under her stiletto heels. Her champagne gold carry-on glided silently behind her, the perfect complement to her charcoal gray tailored coat. She didn't travel, she arrived. Every movement was precise, every nod from the security staff wordless, but respectful. First class to Washington, D.C., seat 2A, just like every month. The Magnolia Lounge welcomed her with a familiar whispered greeting. She sipped her chamomile tea as news headlines scrolled across her tablet screen. Cassandra thrived on routine. Predictability was her armor. When boarding was called, she stood at the perfect moment, not too eager, not too slow. Her presence measured like a symphony's opening note. Her boarding pass beeped at the gate agent, who smiled at her like an old friend. Everything was exactly as it should be until she stepped into the first-class cabin. Row 1 passed, then 2. There in 2B sat a man she hadn't anticipated. Dark-skinned, dressed in a crisp navy suit, fully absorbed in the laptop perched before him. No glance, no acknowledgement. Cassandra paused, not visibly, but inside a thread in her tapestry of control loosened, and she hated that she noticed. Sliding her bag into the overhead bin, Cassandra adjusted it twice more than necessary. Her fingers needed something to do while her mind raced to reassert dominance over the unexpected. She eased into 2A with the grace of someone entering a private club, arranged her scarf perfectly, crossed her legs at the ankle, and placed her designer handbag precisely on her lap. Still the man beside her. Marcus Reid remained utterly indifferent. His focus was fixed on his screen, fingers gliding across the keyboard with steady purpose. Cassandra shot him a practiced side glance. Nothing, no shift, no flicker of recognition. The slight brush of her elbow against his on the armrest was deliberate, a silent reminder that space was being shared and therefore permission was required. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Cassandra sat back, smoothing an invisible wrinkle in her skirt. She exhaled softly, a controlled breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. In her world, acknowledgement was currency, and this man refused to pay the toll. Her stomach twisted faintly, not with fear, but with offense. A disruption to her carefully ordered universe had just quietly declared itself immune to her rules. Cassandra's fingers tapped against her handbag in a silent staccato. After a moment, she tilted her head slightly, voice sweet but sharpened to a fine point. "Are you certain you're in the correct seat?" It wasn't a question. It was a test, an expectation of contrition. Without looking up, Marcus responded evenly, "Yes." One word, absolute, complete. His fingers didn't even pause on the keyboard. Cassandra's lips tightened. Where she came from, questions like that weren't simply answered, they were appeased. She wasn't used to people not rushing to validate her authority, especially not in first class. Settling back into her seat, she stared out the window, the cloudless morning, mocking her rising discomfort. She crossed her legs the opposite way, smoothed her scarf again. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about a breach of an unspoken contract, a contract that said people like her were acknowledged, respected, reassured. And this man beside her, he hadn't even signed it. The plane bustled with the last waves of boarding flight, attendants clicking overhead, bins shut, latecomers squeezing past. But Cassandra sat frozen in her seat, a quiet war raging under her polished exterior. Across the aisle, an executive sipped his wine lazily. Farther back, a young couple whispered and giggled over something on their phones. All normal, all as it should be. Except for Marcus Reid, who continued typing as if Cassandra Blake didn't exist. She lifted a manicured finger and pressed the call button, summoning Naomi Brooks, the senior flight attendant she recognized from previous trips. Naomi approached her, smile, professional tablet in hand. "Yes, Ms. Blake?" Cassandra leaned in, voice pitched low with an air of faint amusement. "I think there may have been a mix-up. I usually don't have anyone seated next to me here. Perhaps something changed in the system." Naomi checked her manifest, a flicker of confusion passing over her face before she forced a smile. "No mistake, ma'am. Mr. Marcus Reid is confirmed in 2B. She showed the screen, the assignment crystal clear. Cassandra's answering smile was thin and cold. "Systems do get tricky sometimes, don't they?" Naomi nodded politely and walked away, but Cassandra's smile dissolved into a tight, colorless line the second she turned her head. Outside the window, a baggage cart rattled along the tarmac unnoticed. Cassandra had already made a decision. She pressed the call button again. Naomi returned her professionalism, starting to fray at the edges. "I'd like to request a seat change." Cassandra said, tone butter, smooth, but the tension beneath it sharp enough to cut glass. Naomi blinked once, composing herself. Is there a problem with the seat, ma'am? No, Cassandra replied, delicately, glancing ever so briefly toward Marcus. I simply don't feel very comfortable. The words, delivered with studied restraint, hit the air with unexpected heaviness. Naomi's eyes flicked between her and Marcus, who continued typing, oblivious. Or so it seemed. Naomi consulted her tablet again. First class is fully booked, she said carefully. There are a few seats available in economy, however. Cassandra's smile was thin as ice. Perhaps, she said sweetly, Mr. Reid would prefer to relocate. The air around row 2 thickened. A few heads turned slightly. Conversation slowed, but Marcus Reid, he hadn't even paused. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around her tablet. She had heard requests like this before, had learned to read the space between the words. She hesitated, then said gently, Ma'am, may I ask, are you feeling unsafe? Cassandra's mouth curved into a pained, almost reluctant smile. She dipped her head slightly, crafting the perfect illusion of reasonableness. I'm not saying that, she said, drawing the words out slowly. I just believe it would be more appropriate for me to have a seat elsewhere. The implication hung thickly between them. Marcus closed his laptop with a soft click, his hands folding over it with slow, deliberate precision. For the first time since Cassandra boarded, he turned and looked at her fully. No anger, no sarcasm, just a quiet, heavy gaze that made her feel finally seen in a way she hadn't intended. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The cabin's atmosphere shifted. A woman 3 rows back casually adjusted her sunglasses, but kept her attention pinned forward. A man near the aisle lowered his newspaper by half an inch. The energy was shifting sharp. Anticipatory. Naomi stood her ground, silent for a long breath, then said, I'll consult with the cabin supervisor. She turned and walked briskly away, leaving Cassandra sitting stiffly in her seat, her palms lightly sweating despite the cool cabin air. Marcus didn't move. His calm was maddening. To Cassandra, it was as if he had already calculated the weight of her discomfort and decided it wasn't his burden to carry. Around them, passengers pretended to nap or read, but the energy coiled tighter, humming just beneath the surface. A situation was brewing, and they all knew it. Cassandra fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, trying to appear composed, trying not to betray the fact that she felt the weight of unseen stares. Marcus shifted slightly in his seat, but not away from her. If anything, he seemed to expand, occupying the space, fully unapologetically. His presence was solid, immovable. Naomi returned a moment later, this time with Raymond, the cabin supervisor, a tall man in a navy vest and calm demeanor, sharpened by years of experience. Good afternoon, Raymond said neutrally. I understand there's been a concern regarding seating arrangements. Cassandra straightened. Yes, I simply requested a seat change. I don't believe it's an unreasonable request, considering. Her voice trailed off, the unspoken accusation thick in the air. Raymond nodded politely, but did not indulge the ambiguity. Is there a specific issue you'd like to report, ma'am? Cassandra's throat tightened. Specific. That was the problem. She didn't have specifics, only assumptions, only discomfort, and for the first time that didn't seem like enough. Raymond's tone remained polite, but unyielding. Ma'am, if there's no documented safety concern or seat malfunction, we cannot forcibly relocate another passenger from their assigned seat. Cassandra blinked rapidly, her world tilting slightly. She hadn't expected resistance. She had expected quiet compliance, the way it always worked. Across the aisle, someone coughed into their hand, but the glance they cast her way was sharp, judging. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and clear. If there's a misunderstanding, I'm happy to clarify right now. He reached into his jacket, slow and deliberate, no sudden movements. Cassandra's heart pounded, not from fear but from something else she couldn't name. He pulled out a leather case, opened it, and held it steady for Raymond and for Cassandra to see. The gold badge caught the light. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Marcus Reid. Silence detonated across the cabin. Cassandra's stomach twisted violently. Passengers leaned in slightly, pretending not to stare, but failing miserably. Naomi's mouth parted in a small, involuntary intake of breath. Marcus kept his hand steady, his face unreadable. Would you like to file an official report, ma'am? He asked, voice smooth as glass. Cassandra couldn't answer. Not because she had nothing to say, but because everything she had believed crumbled. In that moment, for a long second, no one moved. Cassandra's face burned hotter than she ever thought possible. Her body screamed at her to do something, anything. Deny, defend, explain. but the badge gleamed too brightly. It rendered all her justifications hollow. She opened her mouth, a desperate instinct to salvage her image, but nothing coherent came out. I didn't mean, she stammered weakly. Raymond cleared his throat softly, a signal to de-escalate before this spiraled further. Thank you, Agent Reid, he said professionally. No action is required at this time. Marcus nodded once and tucked the badge away with measured grace, like a magician returning an ace to his sleeve. But there was no magic trick here, only truth raw and irrefutable. Cassandra turned forward stiff as a board. She kept her eyes glued to the seat back in front of her, blinking hard to will away the burning behind them. Across the aisle, the businessman casually sipped his drink, his lips twitching into a knowing smirk. The story had already been written in the cabin, and Cassandra wasn't the heroine she imagined herself to be. She was merely another cautionary tale unfolding at 30,000 feet. The plane leveled off, and the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off overhead. Beverage service began, the clinking of glasses and low murmurs filling the air again. Life in the cabin resumed on the surface. But for Cassandra, nothing felt normal anymore. She sat, rigid hands clenching the folds of her skirt, breathing shallowly. She didn't touch the drink. Naomi offered her, just shook her head wordlessly. Marcus, meanwhile, had reopened his laptop, tapping calmly away, as if none of it had touched him. But it had. There was a gravity in the way he moved now, a deliberate quietness that said, "This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last." Cassandra stole a glance at him, really looked this time. Not at his suit or his skin or the assumptions she had piled upon him. Within seconds of boarding, she saw the weight he carried, the invisible battles she had accidentally stepped into and fueled. Her throat closed painfully. She had thought herself immune to such ugliness, thought prejudice wore hoods and shouted slurs, not tasteful scarves and tight smiles. But now she knew better. The only question left was, would she have the courage to change? Cassandra shifted slightly in her seat, the leather creaking beneath her, the world beyond. The tiny window was a blur of clouds and blue sky, but she couldn't focus on any of it. The heavy realization sat in her chest like a stone. Her entire identity, polished, refined, progressive, had been punctured by a single quiet act, assuming Marcus Reid didn't belong. And he had made no scene, no grand gesture, just the steady reveal of a badge shining like a mirror she couldn't look away from. Across the aisle, passengers who once barely noticed her now watched with discreet judgment, their conversations low and coded. She could feel their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. She pressed her fingers tightly against her lap, willing herself to stay composed. Naomi passed again with the beverage cart. When she offered water to Marcus, he accepted with a brief, polite nod. When she reached Cassandra, Naomi's hand hesitated just a fraction, almost imperceptible. But Cassandra noticed it stung more than she cared to admit. Cassandra Blake, the woman who commanded boardrooms and gala fundraisers alike, now sat reduced to silence under the judgment of strangers. Strangers who had witnessed the truth raw and unedited. Cassandra's mind raced, chasing non-existent exits from the shame pooling around her. Maybe if she apologized. No. What would she even say? "Sorry, I assumed you didn't belong." That would only underline the offense, maybe if she explained. But explanations were for misunderstandings, and this hadn't been one. It had been instinct, reflexive and ugly. A sharp voice in her mind whispered the truth. This wasn't about him. It was about you. She gripped the armrest nails, digging lightly into the leather. The announcement for beverage service ending crackled overhead, but Cassandra barely heard it. Her gaze flicked sideways to Marcus. He was calm again, laptop open, his world undisturbed. In a cruel twist, he had returned to peace while she sat imprisoned in her own mind. She envied him, she resented him, she admired him, and buried under it all, she hated herself for needing a badge to see his worth. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as they crossed into cruising altitude. Cassandra turned her head toward the window, pretending to admire the view, but all she could see was the reflection of herself, distorted and unfamiliar. For what felt like hours, neither Cassandra nor Marcus spoke. The humming engines and muted clink of glasses became a soundtrack to the awkward silence between them. Cassandra's mind composed apology after apology, but none survived the journey to her lips. Every version sounded hollow, performative, selfish. She knew what people like her did after moments like these. They posted about learning experiences on social media. They cried in private but changed nothing in public. She didn't want to be that person, but wanting wasn't enough. Marcus glanced her way once briefly, like sensing the turmoil vibrating off her. His expression wasn't cruel. It wasn't anything at all. And somehow that blank patience hurt more than anger would have. It said, "This isn't the first time. You are not the first person, and I have grown tired of teaching the same lesson over and over." Cassandra swallowed hard against the lump rising in her throat. The worst part wasn't that she had misjudged him. The worst part was how easy it had been. When Naomi returned to check on first class again, Cassandra didn't lift her gaze. She couldn't bear to see the polite clipped courtesy in the flight attendant's manner. The shift from warmth to cold neutrality, she had been demoted in an invisible hierarchy she once took for granted. No words were needed. The cabin had decided, and deep down, Cassandra agreed with them. The clock above the cabin door ticked down the minutes toward landing, but to her every second dragged Marcus. Meanwhile, moved like time hadn't touched him at all. He sent an email, sipped his water, made notes in a battered leather notebook. He looked like he belonged here, had always belonged here. The only one who didn't fit the moment now was Cassandra Blake. She wondered if Marcus would tell anyone. Would he recount the story to his colleagues, his friends, his family? Would she become just another story, traded over dinner tables and Zoom calls? She deserved it, but the idea made her stomach lurch anyway. Cassandra clutched the armrest tightly and closed her eyes. Because the only punishment she truly feared had already begun, seeing herself clearly for the first time. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom announcing the beginning of descent. Passengers stirred, closing laptops, buckling seatbelts, adjusting trays, business as usual. But not for Cassandra. She could barely summon the will to move. The wheels touching down wouldn't erase what had happened. There was no walking away from a truth exposed so nakedly. She glanced again at Marcus, still composed, still dignified, still infuriatingly untouched. It wasn't that he had humiliated her. He hadn't said anything cruel or triumphant. He hadn't raised his voice or demanded retribution. No, Marcus Reid had simply let the truth reveal itself and then stood quietly in its light. Cassandra bit the inside of her cheek, grounding herself in the physical sting. She had choices to make when the plane landed. She could bury this moment under layers of rationalization and denial, wrap herself in the comforting lies she had worn for so long, or she could sit with it, learn from it, let it change her. Neither road would be easy, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no going back to who she was before this flight. As the aircraft began its gentle descent, Cassandra stared at the cabin wall in front of her, seeing everything and nothing at once. She knew what was waiting when they landed: texts, emails, meetings, a full life humming back into motion. A life where she still held status, influence, comfort. But inside, something had cracked. She had spent decades curating a version of herself that could walk into any room and command it. Now a single interaction, a glance, a question, a badge had revealed how fragile that image truly was. The self she thought was enlightened, progressive, fair, had collapsed under the weight of a snap judgment. Marcus hadn't humiliated her. She had done that all by herself. She gripped the edge of the seat tighter as the runway grew nearer in the window. Maybe no one else would ever know what happened here. Maybe the story would never leave this cabin, but she would know. Every boardroom she entered, every cause she championed, every meeting she presided over, this moment would lurk underneath. A silent question whispered by her own conscience. Are you the woman you think you are, or the one you just revealed yourself to be? The tires screeched against the tarmac with a jolt that rattled through the cabin. The collective breath of the passengers released in a chorus of clicks and sighs as seatbelts unfastened and bags were snatched from overhead bins. Cassandra stayed seated rigid, watching as others hurried toward the exit. She had always been one of the first to stand to leave quickly, as if her importance demanded it. But not today. Today she understood something she had never fully grasped before. Some moments deserve to be sat with, to be faced without flinching. Marcus remained seated, too patient, composed. He made no move to leave, no effort to rush past her. For a fleeting second, Cassandra considered escaping without saying a word, slipping away and pretending none of it had happened. But that was the old Cassandra, the one who saw only the parts of herself she wanted to see. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of her own breath, and turned toward Marcus. He looked up, not wary, not expectant, just waiting, calm as always. The ball was in her court, and for once she understood that the next words mattered more than anything else she could taught. Cassandra steadied herself, the words clawing their way up from a place deeper than politeness, deeper than shame. I'm sorry, she said, voice low, but clear. Not the performative apology she had rehearsed in her head during the flight. Not the PR-crafted reputation-saving kind. A real one. I judged you. She continued, her throat tight. Without cause. Without reason, I let a fear speak before humanity did. For the first time since boarding, and Marcus's face shifted slightly. Not a smile, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. He nodded once slowly as if weighing the sincerity behind her words. You saw what you were taught to see, he said simply. Now you see more. That's a start. His words weren't cruel. They were heavier than cruelty, laced with a weariness that spoke of battles fought long before today. Cassandra swallowed the lump rising in her chest. Thank you for your patience. She whispered the words, tasting like humility, an unfamiliar but strangely honest flavor. Marcus nodded again and turned back toward his bag, signaling the conversation was over. But for Cassandra, it was only just beginning, because real change doesn't end with an apology. It begins there. When Cassandra finally stepped into the aisle, she moved differently than before. Gone was the practiced efficiency, the barely concealed sense of entitlement. She carried no armor now, only awareness, only the heavy, invisible cost of recognizing the kind of person she had been without even realizing it. As she rolled her carry-on behind her, she caught glimpses of the other passengers. Some avoided her gaze, some didn't bother pretending. A few nodded slightly at Marcus as they passed quiet tributes to his calm dignity. And then as she moved toward the exit door, Naomi stood there, professional to the last, but there was something different in her eyes too. Not contempt, not anger, just disappointment. And somehow that was worse. Cassandra nodded at Naomi, a silent acknowledgement, and Naomi gave a stiff, polite nod back. No words. None were needed. Stepping into the jet bridge, Cassandra felt the cold reality rush in to meet her. This wasn't a story that ended at baggage claim. It would follow her into every conversation, every decision, every mirror. Because once you truly see yourself, you can't unsee it. Outside the terminal, Cassandra paused. The world bustled around her, cars honking, rolling suitcases, rattling travelers, reuniting, life in full messy motion. But inside she was still. She thought about the next steps, the meetings she would walk into, the causes she would champion, the statements she would make. And how none of it would matter if she didn't start with the truth she had learned here on a 2-hour flight that turned her inside out. She pulled out her phone, staring at the familiar list of contacts, messages, obligations. Then she did something small, almost invisible. She opened a notes app and started writing. Don't wait for someone to prove they belong. Assume they do. Assume they deserve dignity before the badge, before the title, before the explanation. She stared at it for a long moment, then saved it. It wasn't a public apology. It wasn't a social media post. It wasn't a performative act. It was the first step toward planning something real. And real change, she finally understood, doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins quietly, one uncomfortable truth at a time. And inside the terminal, Cassandra moved slowly, still caught in the echo of what had just happened. She was adjusting her scarf absent-mindedly when she noticed a small commotion near the baggage claim. A group of travelers, mostly young, crowded around a man. Marcus Reid. He stood calmly answering a few questions from what appeared to be a group of university students, judging by their backpacks and eager expressions. Cassandra hung back, invisible in the flow of foot traffic. One young man, maybe 20, was animatedly speaking with Marcus, who nodded and smiled faintly, a genuine if weary kindness in his expression. It struck her again the Marcus Reid she had tried to diminish wasn't just some guy. He was someone people looked up to, someone who carried the weight of others' hopes without complaint. She tightened her grip on her carry-on, feeling like she stood on the wrong side of an invisible line drawn through the world. And for the first time, she truly wondered, how many other moments had she misread before this one? Moments she couldn't rewind. People she would never be able to apologize to. Cassandra found herself rooted to the spot, watching Marcus interact with the students. He wasn't lecturing them. He wasn't flaunting his badge or his status. He was simply listening, really listening to their stories, their questions, their excitement. It felt both humbling and heartbreaking. For years, Cassandra had believed she was one of the good ones, the ally, the advocate, the progressive force in stuffy rooms. But the truth was harsher. She had lived too long in a bubble, one where empathy was an accessory, not a foundation. She thought back to every event she had hosted, every speech she had applauded, every charity she had chaired. None of it mattered if at the first test her instincts betrayed a different truth. Real change, she realized, wasn't in words or titles. It lived in the tiny private moments, the first glance, the silent assumption, the unspoken suspicion. Those were the battlegrounds where the future was either defended or destroyed. Eventually, the crowd around Marcus dispersed, and he retrieved his simple black duffel bag from the carousel. Cassandra could have walked away then, could have disappeared into the crowd, boarded her car service, and buried this experience under 100 other priorities, but something inside her refused. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Marcus noticed her approach immediately. He straightened slightly, not defensive, not closed, but watchful. Cassandra stopped a few feet away, unsure how to even begin. "Agent Reid," she said quietly. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He didn't speak, just waited. "I know you don't owe me anything," Cassandra continued, voice low and steady. "But I wanted to say your patience today. It mattered more than you know." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then simply said, "Good." No lectures, no anger, just a single word heavy with meaning. It was not absolution, it was acknowledgement. And for Cassandra Blake, that was enough. The city outside the airport buzzed with energy, cars honking, people rushing. But Cassandra felt oddly calm as she hailed a cab. She slid into the back seat, giving the driver her hotel address. As they pulled into traffic, she leaned back, staring out at the skyline. She knew so well, but suddenly saw differently. She thought about her life, the events she would attend, the conversations she would have. She thought about how easy it would be to slip back into old habits to comfort herself with good intentions. But easy wasn't an option anymore. If today had taught her anything, it was that real change was ugly, raw, and deeply personal. It wasn't about how loudly you claimed to support justice. It was about the assumptions you carried silently. It was about the choices you made when no one was watching. Cassandra opened her phone again, scrolling past unread messages and notifications. She didn't post anything. Instead, she opened her private notes once more and wrote 3 simple words beneath the first entry: "Do better always." When the cab pulled up to the hotel, Cassandra didn't immediately move. She sat there for a moment, breathing in the silence, feeling the weight of the day settle deeper into her bones. Today had been a fracture in her perfect mirror. But maybe fractures weren't just about breaking. Maybe they were about letting the light in. She stepped out of the cab, suitcase rolling behind her, and walked through the hotel doors without her usual swagger. No longer the Cassandra Blake who had boarded the plane hours ago. A different woman. A quieter woman. A woman who had finally begun the long, messy, beautiful work of seeing really. Seeing the world around her and herself without the comforting filters she once relied on. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would be uncomfortable, humbling, and filled with painful self-inventory. But for the first time, Cassandra wasn't afraid of it. She welcomed it because now she understood. True change doesn't happen by chance, it happens by choice. And today she had made her first real one. True change doesn't happen when we're praised. It happens when we're uncomfortable. It happens when we confront the small, hidden biases we thought we were above. Respect doesn't require a badge, a title, or an explanation. Every human being deserves dignity before credentials, before assumptions, before judgment. Because the real journey toward justice begins not out there, but inside each of us.